The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as thousands of tourists gathered for the changing of the guard ceremony. Among them stood Marcus Thompson, a United States Marine on his first vacation in 20 years of service. He wore civilian clothes, but his military bearing was unmistakable. His back straight, eyes alert, and every movement precise despite being off duty. Marcus had served 4 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq. His chest bore scars from shrapnel and his left arm carried a tattoo honoring fallen brothers. Today, however, he was just another tourist in London, trying to understand what normal life felt like after 2 decades of military service. The crowd buzzed with excitement as the ceremony began. Families pushed forward, children on shoulders, cameras clicking constantly. The famous red-uniformed guards marched in perfect formation, their tall black hats creating an impressive silhouette against the palace walls. The precision of their movements reminded Marcus of his own military training, though their traditions stretched back centuries. Standing nearby was James Wellington, a member of the Queen's Guard with 15 years of experience. Beneath his iconic red uniform and bearskin hat, James carried himself with the same dignity that had protected British royalty for generations. His face remained expressionless, as tradition demanded, but his eyes constantly scanned the crowd for any sign of trouble. James had joined the Guard after serving in the parachute regiment. He had seen action in Northern Ireland and the Balkans before earning his place among the elite soldiers who protected the monarchy. To him, this duty was sacred. Every tourist's camera, every child's laugh, every moment of pageantry was part of something larger than himself. The ceremony proceeded without incident until a group of protesters appeared at the edge of the crowd. They carried signs criticizing military actions overseas and began shouting slogans about peace. Most tourists simply moved away, but the situation quickly became tense when some protesters pushed closer to the guards. Marcus watched the scene unfold with professional interest. He recognized the signs of a situation that could escalate quickly. The protesters were passionate but peaceful, yet he could see how their proximity to the guards was creating tension. Security personnel moved to contain the situation, but they were outnumbered. One particularly aggressive protester broke free from the group and ran toward the line of guards. James Wellington, maintaining his position in formation, found himself directly in the man's path. Protocol demanded that guards remain motionless during the ceremony, but protection of the palace and public safety took precedence. The protester carried what appeared to be a package in his hands. In the post-9/11 world, such behavior triggered immediate security responses. Tourist cameras turned toward the unfolding drama as security guards rushed to intercept the man. Marcus felt his military instincts kick in. Without thinking, he pushed through the crowd toward the disturbance. His trained eye assessed the situation in seconds. One potential threat, multiple civilians in the line of fire, and security personnel still several yards away. The protester reached James Wellington's position just as Marcus arrived. Time seemed to slow as 3 men faced each other in the middle of the ceremony. The protester held out his package, shouting about military violence, while James remained frozen in his ceremonial position. Marcus stepped between them, his presence immediately changing the dynamic. He didn't speak, didn't make any aggressive moves, but his positioning made it clear that he was protecting both the guard and managing the protester. The crowd fell silent, sensing that something significant was happening. "I just want to give this to him," the protester said, his voice shaking with emotion. "It's letters from families who lost loved ones. They deserve to know." Marcus could see that the package was indeed a bundle of letters, but he also understood why security was concerned. In his years of service, he had learned that good intentions could still create dangerous situations. "I understand your message," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of experience. But this isn't the way. James Wellington remained motionless, but his eyes met Marcus's for just a moment. In that brief exchange, two soldiers from different nations recognized each other. They saw the shared understanding that comes from serving something larger than yourself. Security personnel finally reached the scene, but they stopped short when they saw the strange tableau that had formed. An American veteran, a British guardsman, and a protester stood in a triangle of tension while hundreds of people watched in absolute silence. The protester looked at Marcus, then at James, and seemed to realize that his approach was wrong. "These letters," he said, his voice breaking, "they're from people who just want answers. They want to know why." Marcus nodded slowly. "They deserve answers," he agreed, "but forcing them on someone who can't respond isn't the way to honor their questions." For several minutes, the three men stood without moving. The protester clutched his letters, Marcus maintained his protective stance, and James remained locked in his ceremonial position. The crowd watched, mesmerized by the silent drama playing out before them. Children stopped crying, conversations ceased, and even the clicking of camera shutters seemed muted. Everyone present sensed they were witnessing something profound, though none could articulate exactly what it was. The protester finally lowered his hands, tears streaming down his face. "How do we make them understand?" he asked. "How do we make them see what their decisions cost?" Marcus took a step closer, his voice gentle but firm. "By showing them the same respect they showed when they put on the uniform," he said. "Whether you agree with the wars or not, these men served. They followed orders from leaders elected by people like us." James Wellington's eyes flickered with something that might have been gratitude, though his expression never changed. He had heard similar protests many times, but he had never seen someone bridge the gap between protester and soldier the way this American was doing. The security team waited, recognizing that something important was happening. Their job was to protect the ceremony and the guards, but forcing the situation could turn a peaceful moment into something violent. Marcus extended his hand toward the protester. "What's your name?" he asked. "David," the man replied, wiping his eyes. "David Coleman. My brother died in Afghanistan 3 years ago." Marcus felt the familiar weight of loss that every veteran carried. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said simply. "What was your brother's name?" "Thomas. Thomas Coleman. He was a medic with the Royal Army Medical Corps." James Wellington's eyes widened slightly. He had known Thomas Coleman. They had served together briefly in Helmand Province before James transferred to the Guard. Thomas had been a good soldier and a better man. The recognition showed in James's subtle shift of posture, and Marcus caught it immediately. "You knew him," Marcus said to James, though the guard couldn't respond. David saw it too. "You knew Tommy?" he whispered. The moment stretched between them, three men connected by loss, service, and the invisible threads that bind those who have seen war's reality. The crowd remained silent, instinctively understanding that they were witnessing something sacred. Marcus made a decision that would change all their lives. He stepped back and saluted James Wellington, a crisp military salute that honored both the British soldier and the memory of Thomas Coleman. It was unprecedented for a foreign national to salute a member of the Queen's Guard during ceremony, but it felt like the only appropriate response. James Wellington faced a choice. Protocol demanded that he maintain his position, but honor demanded that he acknowledge both the salute and the memory of a fallen comrade. The rules of his service were clear, but the call of military brotherhood was stronger. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, James Wellington's right hand began to move toward his temple. The crowd held its breath as they watched a soldier choose between duty and honor, not realizing that sometimes they were the same thing. The morning sun climbed higher as the three men stood in their moment of understanding, while hundreds of witnesses waited to see what would happen next. The ceremony had become something entirely different. something that none of them would ever forget. Security personnel exchanged glances, unsure how to proceed. Their training covered many scenarios, but not this one. A foreign veteran honoring a British guard while a protester mourned his brother's sacrifice created a situation that required wisdom rather than procedure. The silence stretched on, profound and complete, as if the entire world had stopped to watch three men navigate the space between conflict and compassion, between duty and humanity, between the rules they lived by and the principles they served. James Wellington's hand moved with deliberate slowness, each inch a decision that weighed centuries of tradition against the immediate call of military honor. The red wool of his uniform seemed to grow heavier as sweat formed beneath his bearskin hat. Every eye in the courtyard watched his hand's journey toward his temple. The crowd had grown larger as word spread through the tourist groups. People pushed closer, phones recording what they sensed was an historic moment. A street performer who had been entertaining children nearby stopped his act and joined the circle of witnesses. Even the pigeons seemed to have settled into silence. Marcus held his salute, unwavering, his arm locked in perfect position. 20 years of military service had taught him patience, but this moment felt different. He wasn't waiting for orders or the end of a mission. He was waiting for a fellow soldier to choose between two forms of duty. David Coleman clutched his bundle of letters tighter, understanding now that his protest had transformed into something else entirely. His brother Thomas had written about moments like this, when soldiers connected across nationality and conflict. "You find brothers in the strangest places," Thomas had written from Afghanistan. "Sometimes they wear different uniforms, sometimes they speak different languages, but when you look in their eyes, you see yourself." James's hand reached the halfway point of its journey. His mind raced through years of training, regulations, and tradition. The Queen's Guard had stood motionless through bombs, protests, and storms. They were living symbols of British resolve, trained to remain unmoved by anything short of genuine threat. But this American soldier posed no threat. His salute was respectful, earned through service that James understood intimately. Marcus's scars, visible on his neck above his civilian collar, told stories of battles fought in defense of similar ideals to those James protected. A child in the crowd tugged at her mother's coat. "Why isn't the guard moving, Mummy?" she whispered. "Shh," her mother replied. But she didn't know the answer either. None of them did. This wasn't covered in any guidebook or tourist information. This was something happening for the first time. The senior security officer, watching from the palace entrance, spoke quietly into his radio. "Command, we have a situation in the courtyard. Request guidance on handling unprecedented ceremonial breach." The response crackled back. "Monitor and assess. Do not intervene unless public safety is compromised." James Wellington's hand continued its rise. Sweat dripped down his back despite the cool London morning. He thought of Thomas Coleman, who had saved 3 soldiers' lives in Helmand before an IED claimed his own. Thomas had been scheduled to transfer to the Guard after his tour. James had recommended him personally. Marcus began to understand the weight of what he had initiated. This wasn't just about returning a salute. He was asking a man to break centuries of protocol for the sake of honor between soldiers. The responsibility felt enormous. The silence stretched deeper. Camera shutters had stopped clicking as photographers realized they were documenting something too profound for casual snapshots. Tour guides ceased their commentary. Even the traffic on the surrounding streets seemed muted. An elderly man in the crowd stepped forward slightly. He wore a Royal British Legion pin on his lapel, marking him as a veteran. His weathered hands shook as he recognized what was happening. During his service in Cyprus 40 years earlier, he had seen similar moments when military honor transcended regulations. "Come on, lad," he whispered, though James couldn't hear him. "Do what's right." James Wellington's training warred with his conscience. The manual of military law was clear about maintaining position during ceremonial duties, but the unwritten code among soldiers was equally clear about honoring those who had served with distinction. His hand reached 3/4 of the way to his temple. The crowd collectively held its breath. Parents pulled children closer, instinctively understanding they were witnessing something significant. Hotel windows overlooking the courtyard filled with faces as guests noticed the unusual gathering. David Coleman found himself praying for the first time since his brother's funeral. He prayed that this moment would honor Thomas's memory, that somehow this silent standoff would mean something lasting. Marcus felt his arm beginning to tremble from holding the salute, but he remained steady. His father had been a Marine in Vietnam, and Marcus remembered stories about moments when honor mattered more than orders. "Sometimes," his father had said, "being a good soldier means being a good man first." A news crew arrived at the edge of the crowd, but they stopped setting up when they realized the gravity of what was happening. The reporter lowered her microphone, understanding that some moments were too sacred for commentary. James's hand reached the final inches of its journey. His heart pounded against his red tunic as he made his decision. The weight of tradition pressed down on him, but the call of military brotherhood pulled him forward. In the crowd, a small group of active-duty American soldiers on leave recognized Marcus's Marine bearing. They had heard about the confrontation through the tourist network and came to witness it. Seeing their fellow American honoring a foreign soldier filled them with pride and concern in equal measure. The British veterans in the crowd understood the significance better than anyone. They remembered similar moments from their own service when protocol and principle collided. Several of them began to weep silently, remembering comrades lost and honors earned. James Wellington's hand completed its journey to his temple in a perfect salute. The crowd gasped as one, then fell even deeper into silence. Two soldiers from different nations stood locked in mutual respect, while hundreds watched in amazement. The salute lasted exactly 3 seconds, following military tradition, but it felt eternal to those witnessing it. When James lowered his hand, the spell broke partially, but the moment's power remained. Marcus lowered his own salute with equal precision, then did something unexpected. He removed a small medal from his pocket, his bronze star earned in Iraq, and placed it gently on the ground between himself and James. It was his way of honoring both James's courage in breaking protocol and Thomas Coleman's ultimate sacrifice. David Coleman understood immediately. He knelt and placed his bundle of letters beside the medal, not as a protest anymore, but as a tribute to all those who served and died. James Wellington faced another choice. He could return to formation, pretending the moment hadn't happened, or he could acknowledge the gifts placed before him. The crowd waited, understanding that this decision would complete whatever had begun with the first salute. The young guardsman stepped forward one precise step and bowed his head in acknowledgement. It was a small movement, barely noticeable to those unfamiliar with military bearing, but it completed the circle of honor that had formed between the three men. The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause, but it wasn't the excited clapping of tourists witnessing a spectacle. It was the respectful appreciation of people who had seen something profound, something that spoke to the better angels of human nature. Security personnel moved forward, not to arrest or disperse, but to protect the moment from becoming chaotic. They formed a gentle barrier around the three men, allowing the emotional scene to conclude with dignity. James Wellington returned to his position in formation, his expression once again impassive, but his eyes held a light that hadn't been there before. He had chosen honor over regulation, and somehow the world hadn't ended. If anything, it felt more complete. Marcus stepped back into the crowd, but he didn't leave. He remained where James could see him, a reminder that the moment had been real and meaningful. The bronze star remained on the cobblestones, catching the morning light. David Coleman gathered his letters, but his posture had changed. The anger and desperation were gone, replaced by something that looked like peace. His protest had become something larger than he had imagined. The ceremony continued, but everyone present knew it had been transformed. The precision and pageantry remained. But now it carried additional meaning. The guards marched not just as symbols of tradition, but as representatives of the honor that connected all those who served. Tourists who had come for photographs left with stories. Children who had expected entertainment received education about courage and principle. Adults who had planned a simple outing found themselves questioning what duty meant in their own lives. The news crew that had arrived late struggled to capture what had happened. How do you report on a moment that existed in silence? How do you explain the power of 2 salutes to an audience that hadn't felt the weight of that silence? As the ceremony concluded, the crowd began to disperse slowly. Nobody wanted to leave immediately. The moment felt too important to abandon quickly. Conversations started quietly. People trying to process what they had witnessed. James Wellington and his fellow guards marched away in perfect formation, but the Bronze Star remained on the ground where Marcus had placed it. Security personnel cordoned off the area, treating the medal as something significant rather than simply lost property. Marcus finally approached David Coleman as the crowd thinned. "Your brother would be proud," he said simply. David nodded, tears in his eyes. "Thank you for helping me understand." The 2 men shook hands, connected now by shared understanding rather than conflict. Marcus gave David his contact information, knowing they would stay in touch. Some connections, forged in moments like this, lasted lifetimes. As they parted ways, neither man knew that their encounter had been recorded by dozens of phones and cameras. By evening, the video would be circulating worldwide, sparking discussions about honor, duty, and the bonds that unite those who serve. The video appeared on social media within hours, shared first by a teenage tourist who had filmed the entire encounter on her phone. She titled it simply, "Soldiers Honor Each Other." But the footage spread far beyond her few hundred followers. By midnight, the clip had been viewed millions of times across different platforms. Marcus Thompson returned to his hotel room that evening to discover his phone buzzing with messages from fellow Marines around the world. They had seen the video, recognized him despite his civilian clothes, and wanted to know the story behind the moment. His commanding officer called from Camp Pendleton. "Thompson," Colonel Martinez said when Marcus answered, "I've been getting calls about a video. Something about you saluting a British guard?" Marcus sat heavily on his hotel bed. "Yes, sir. I can explain." "No need to explain, Marine. I called to tell you that what you did out there today represented the Corps with honor. The British ambassador called our command to express his appreciation. You showed what it means to be a Marine even when you're not wearing the uniform." Across London, James Wellington had been summoned to meet with his commanding officer immediately after the ceremony. He stood at attention in the office, still wearing his red tunic, uncertain what consequences awaited him. "Wellington," Major Harrison began, "what happened in the courtyard today was unprecedented." "Yes, sir. You broke protocol. You returned a salute during a ceremonial duty when regulations clearly state you should remain motionless." James felt his military career flashing before his eyes. "Yes, sir. However," the major continued, "sometimes protocol serves a higher purpose than itself. Sometimes breaking a rule upholds the values that created the rule in the first place. Your actions today honored both the Crown and the military service of an allied nation." James blinked in surprise. "Sir, the palace has issued a statement calling your actions a demonstration of the international brotherhood among those who serve. Whitehall considers this a diplomatic success. Well done, Wellington." Meanwhile, David Coleman sat in his small London flat, staring at the bundle of letters he had carried to the palace. The anger that had driven him there seemed distant now, replaced by something more complex. He understood his brother's service differently, after watching two soldiers honor each other across national lines. His phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize with an American country code. "Is this David Coleman?" an unfamiliar voice asked. "Yes." "This is Sarah Henderson. I'm Thomas's commanding officer in Afghanistan. I saw the video of what happened today. I've been trying to reach you since your brother died. He asked me to give you something if anything happened to him." David's hands shook as he listened. "What do you mean?" "Thomas wrote you a letter. He made me promise to deliver it personally if he didn't come home. I've been looking for you for 3 years. When I saw the video and recognized your name, I knew I had found you." 3 days later, Marcus Thompson sat in a small cafe near Westminster Bridge across from David Coleman and a woman in American Army dress uniform. Major Sarah Henderson had flown to London specifically to deliver Thomas's final letter to his brother. "He talked about you constantly," Sarah told David as she handed him the sealed envelope. "He was proud of your passion for justice, even when he disagreed with your methods." David's hands trembled as he opened the letter his brother had written 3 years earlier. The first lines made him weep. "David, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it home. But I want you to know that I served with honor alongside people from around the world. We weren't fighting for politics or governments. We were fighting for each other, for the idea that everyone deserves to live free from fear. Don't let anger consume you. Channel that passion into something that builds rather than tears down." Marcus watched David read, remembering similar letters he had carried for fallen friends. "He understood what service means," Marcus said quietly. "He did," Sarah agreed. "And somehow, what happened at the palace that day honored exactly what he believed in." The video continued to spread, spawning dozens of reaction videos and news articles. Military families shared it with pride, while peace activists praised it as an example of humanity transcending conflict. The moment became a symbol of how understanding could bridge even the deepest divides. James Wellington found himself assigned to a new duty, serving as a liaison between the Guard and various veterans organizations. His superiors recognized that his actions had demonstrated a unique understanding of military honor that could serve broader diplomatic purposes. A month later, he received an unexpected letter. "Dear Sergeant Wellington, you don't know me, but you knew my son Thomas Coleman in Afghanistan. My other son David tells me you served with him before joining the Guard. I wanted to thank you for honoring Thomas's memory the way you did in the courtyard. What you risked to show respect for an American soldier while maintaining your own honor is exactly the kind of courage Thomas would have appreciated. He believed that soldiers of all nations shared something special. You proved him right. With deepest gratitude, Margaret Coleman." Marcus extended his vacation in London, finding himself drawn to visit military museums and monuments around the city. At the Imperial War Museum, he encountered a group of British veterans who recognized him from the video. They bought him drinks and shared stories from their own service, creating bonds that transcended nationality. One evening, Marcus returned to Buckingham Palace during another changing of the guard ceremony. He stood in the crowd, just another tourist, and watched James Wellington march with his unit. When James's eyes found his in the crowd, the guardsman gave the slightest nod of recognition. After the ceremony, Marcus waited outside the palace gates. James appeared eventually, now in civilian clothes. "I hoped I'd see you again," James said. "I couldn't leave London without thanking you properly," Marcus replied. "What you did took real courage." "What we did," James corrected. "It took both of us." They walked to a nearby pub where James introduced Marcus to a group of his fellow guardsmen and veterans. The conversation flowed easily, military experiences creating instant understanding despite different uniforms and flags. To Thomas Coleman, Marcus raised his glass when drinks arrived. To Thomas Coleman, the table echoed. David Coleman had used his brother's letter as inspiration to start a new organization. Instead of protesting military actions, he began working with veterans groups to provide support for those struggling with the transition to civilian life. He called it the Thomas Coleman Foundation, focusing on building bridges between military families and those who questioned military policy. His first major event brought together veterans from multiple countries for a dialogue about service, sacrifice, and the cost of war. Marcus flew back from California to attend, and James took leave from his guard duties to participate. The event was held in a community center near the palace where their first encounter had taken place. Media coverage was extensive, but the focus was on understanding rather than spectacle. My brother believed that service members from different nations had more in common with each other than with those who had never served, David told the gathered crowd. 3 months ago, I learned he was right when I watched 2 soldiers choose honor over protocol. Marcus spoke about the instant recognition he had felt when looking into James's eyes. Military service creates a language that doesn't need words, he said. We knew each other immediately, even though we had never met. James talked about the decision to return the salute. Some rules exist to preserve order, he explained. Others exist to preserve values. When those come into conflict, you have to choose which serves the higher purpose. The bronze star that Marcus had left on the palace cobblestones had been retrieved by security and eventually returned to him through diplomatic channels. During the event, he presented it to the Thomas Coleman Foundation as a symbol of their mission to honor service while working for understanding. The ripple effects of that moment in the courtyard continued expanding. Military academies began using the video as a teaching tool about leadership and moral courage. Diplomatic training programs cited it as an example of how personal actions could have international significance. A year later, Marcus received orders to London as part of a new exchange program between American and British forces. His first assignment was working with James Wellington on a project to create better cooperation between Allied military units. Their office was located just blocks from Buckingham Palace. Every morning, they walked past the spot where they had first encountered each other, now marked by a small memorial plaque that tourists often visited. David Coleman's foundation had grown into an international organization with chapters in 12 countries. He often spoke at military ceremonies, sharing his brother's letter and the story of how 2 soldiers had helped him understand the true meaning of service. The protester who had once angrily confronted guards now worked to build bridges between those who served and those who questioned the missions they were given. His brother's words guided him. Channel that passion into something that builds rather than tears down. On the 2nd anniversary of their encounter, Marcus, James, and David met at the same cafe near Westminster Bridge. They had become unlikely friends, bonded by a moment that had changed all their lives. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't saluted that day? David asked Marcus. Marcus considered the question. I think about it sometimes, but I realize that moment was always going to happen. Maybe not that day, maybe not with us, but that need for understanding between people who serve, that was always going to find a way to express itself. James nodded. Some things are bigger than the individuals involved. We were just the instruments that day. They sat in comfortable silence, watching London life flow past the cafe windows. The video of their encounter still circulated online, still inspired people around the world, but for them, the moment had become something more personal and lasting. The foundation continued its work, bringing together military families and peace activists for dialogue and understanding. Marcus and James collaborated on training programs that helped soldiers from different nations work together more effectively. The lessons learned in that silent standoff in the palace courtyard had become the foundation for broader cooperation and understanding. As they prepared to leave the cafe, David pulled out a new letter. one he had written to his brother's memory. "I wanted to read you something," he said. "Thomas, 3 years ago I was angry at the world, at the military, at the decisions that took you away from us. Today, I understand that your service was part of something larger than any one mission or conflict. You served alongside people like Marcus and James, people who choose honor over convenience, understanding over anger, and brotherhood over division. The foundation we built from that moment in the courtyard now helps hundreds of veterans every year. We're turning pain into purpose, just like you would have wanted. Your sacrifice meant something, not just for the mission you died supporting, but for the understanding it helped create. Rest in peace, brother. Your legacy lives on." The three men walked together toward Buckingham Palace, where tourists still gathered daily to watch the changing of the guard. Among them were always some who knew the story of the silent standoff, who looked for signs of the deeper meaning behind the ceremony. As they reached the palace gates, a young boy tugged on his father's coat. "Dad, is this where the soldier story happened? The one you showed me on the computer?" The father smiled and pointed to the courtyard. "Right there, son. That's where 3 men showed the world what honor really looks like." Marcus, James, and David exchanged glances, understanding that their story had become larger than themselves. It had become a reminder that in moments of division and conflict, human connection and mutual respect could still bridge any gap. The silent standoff that had frozen a crowd in amazement for a few minutes had created ripples that would continue spreading for generations, proving that sometimes the most powerful messages are delivered without words, through simple acts of honor between those who understand what it means to serve something greater than themselves.